Greetings to all who may be seeing this. My name is Marvin Anderson Parker, and this will be my final presentation on the Synoptic Gospels. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So, to begin, we may start by asking ourselves, what even are Synoptic Gospels? Now, I'm sure we're aware of the four Gospels. These are the four written accounts of the life of Jesus Christ, the four books at the beginning of the New Testament, seen in the form of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, when you begin to examine the information and content within these books, you can then further categorize them into what is known as synoptic gospels. This means they are seen together and they have enough similarity to create their whole category. So, because they are so similar, let's go ahead and dive into how much these show in common with each other. So, like we said before, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the three gospels that share a very large amount of similarity in between them. We see that Matthew has over 55% similarity in his content to Mark and almost 19% similarity in his content to Luke. And then Luke has almost 43% similarity in his content to Mark and 17% in his similarity in content to Matthew. So we one see how these show the most similarity between each other, but we can also see how both Matthew and Luke have more in common with Mark than each other. And we may wonder, why is that? Now, there is a potential theory that can back this, talking about the origin of these gospels. The next thing we'll talk about is what is called Markan priority. This is the theory that Mark was the first gospel to be written. Now, like we said previously in the last slide, Mark has the most similarity in common between both Matthew and Luke. This is another reason why people believe it's the first one written, that they are able to source Mark in the creation of Matthew and Luke. And even though Mark doesn't include certain passages like the Beatitudes and Lord's Prayer, it does still have the same amount in common, or more in common with Matthew and Luke than Matthew and Luke have with each other. Now, we also look at the style that Mark was written. There are passages, including Jesus being tempted in the desert, that when said in Mark, as far as the Spirit compelling Jesus to the wilderness, that seem a little bit rougher in the style it is given than in Matthew and Luke. So the theory is that Matthew and Luke were able to see this and smooth out some of the phrases similar to that. We also look at the original transcripts. So Mark tend to observe Aramaic tradition on a greater degree than the Greek, which would denote having an earlier of time of origin in writing than both Matthew and Luke. And let's not forget the most obvious thing we see when with Mark in comparison to the other two, which is that it's the shortest gospel. Now, whenever you're writing something, it's likely you want to add on to it in comparison to take away. So, Mark being the shortest gospel is another potential reason why it was the first gospel to be written. Now, we had a fun discussion about how the three gospels have a lot of similarity to each other. Why don't we also discuss the fourth gospel of John and its differences that separates it from the synoptics? Now, the reason the Gospel of John is separated from Synoptic because it has almost 91% of material that is seen as original or not in the other three Gospels. There are many examples, but some of the greater ones includes the fact that John doesn't use parables, which is very heavy included in the prior three books, and instead it uses a lot of forms of symbolism. This can be seen in some of the seven I am statements. One example being, I am the true vine. So, the amount of original material definitely dictates this as being a different gospel in its style versus the synoptics. John has a very poetic, very beautiful type of style, and the information is definitely given in a different degree than the other two. Now, we also can describe the perspective of the Gospel of John as being from above downward. So this emphasizes the divine nature and identity of Jesus from the very beginning. So even though it's still talking about Jesus being God in the form of man, it always includes the fact that he is divine in his identity. And then we also see that John has such a great confidence in the plan of the Father. And there's a lot of anguish and there's a lot of despair that is emphasized in the synoptics, but this isn't seen to the degree and perspective in the Gospel of John. So these are some key reasons to why this is its own separate category in comparison to the synoptics. Now, why is this unit impactful? Why is this important to understand? Well, truthfully, understanding the reason and different facts behind the four books also help us to understand and have a more in-depth view of the life of Jesus. It is important that we see these four books and how they are written and how we can categorize them so that we can have a more clear explanation and understanding of the identical events that are seen within these four gospels